those of you who are joining us. We're delighted that you could be with us now. I'm going to turn the program back over, or turn the microphone, excuse me, back over to Anne to set the stage for our afternoon. Yeah.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed a very hearty lunch. We're so grateful for the people who prepared it and planned for it. It was really delicious. I think we may have had a little bit of the changing of the guard. We have many colleagues still here, and we have some that needed to go off and take care of afternoon things, and some who are arriving now after taking care of all their morning commitments. So that is what we wanted, people to feel that they could come and go as seemed appropriate for their schedules. We're very, very grateful that everyone is here. And I just want to say a few things as we get started, particularly knowing that some people were not able to be with us in the morning. So we are, as we all know, I think, focused on the topic of changing academic work. How it is changing and how perhaps we may want some of it to change, and how can we support academic work in that process. For those who were not able to be here this morning, we were so grateful. Our moderator and our speakers were very, very thoughtful, each bringing their experience and some diverse perspectives to the topic of what is changing in academic work. And we heard a bit about the external context and what's changing there. We heard a bit more internally about our students and the extent to which they may or may not be changing. We talked a little bit about AI, and then we also talked about preparing our future faculty. And I think most of us who were here this morning were quite daunted by the statistics that Ansley Abraham was able to share with us, that despite efforts, and some progress, the diversity of our faculty, we still have quite a long ways to go. So those were just a few of the highlights, and I also wanted to emphasize that one of our speakers, Dia Fulmer-Greenhood, and others also mentioned, as we think about changes in the academy and how we may wish it to change, how valuable it is to take a systems perspective and to think not just about tweaks here and there, but how do the pieces fit together. And I know there's a number of people in this room who write and think about that. As we get started for the afternoon, I want to share a tiny little story that came to my mind this morning. So Dia was talking about her experiences as a new professor a number of years ago, and what a fine job she was doing teaching. But that the students weren't necessarily demonstrating the learning at the level that she wished. And what she learned from that and how it's influenced her work as a professor and also as a leader of the teaching center at the University of Kansas. And it was a very good story to help us really think about who are our students and how do we meet them where they are as learners. But it brought to my mind something that happened when I was a beginning faculty member now about 4 decades ago. My husband, John Beck, and I began our teaching careers. We had been at the University of Michigan in graduate school, and then we were at Oklahoma State University teaching. And I had never taught before, but one of the first class I was to teach was a class on teaching strategies in higher education. There I was. So I was avidly reading, and my husband can attest, as we moved from Ann Arbor to Stillwater, Oklahoma, I'm reading every second to be at least 5 minutes ahead of the students. And there we were in Oklahoma. I'm from the east. This is the furthest west I've lived. I'm from way in the east originally. So that's important to know, because one day we maybe were on the 3rd class. I hadn't been teaching very long. And I was teaching, and I was vaguely aware that maybe there was a siren, and usually when I hear a siren, I think, I hope someone, perhaps if they've been in an accident, this is going to be safe. That little thought will cross my mind. But that's about all the attention I gave to it. Rather, en masse, the class of 30-some people leaped up, and they ran to the door. And I can remember thinking, I've only been teaching about 3 class sessions, and I know I'm really new at this, but how could I be that bad at it? And so, literally, they were running to the door, and the last person turned around and said, Dr. Austin, you need to come. That's that's the siren that says there's a tornado on the campus. And we're on my fourth floor. So I hastened along to join them. But I was thinking about it just now when Dia was speaking and talking about her early career, because mine had that inauspicious start to it. But it actually is very relevant to what we were talking about, because what it taught me was that it's really important to be aware of your context and your surroundings. In that case, it would have been probably better if I had noticed that there was a siren and there was a tornado coming. So in the spirit of, I thought I would share that, in the spirit of our wanting to think about the changing context that we're all in and what it might apply for our teaching. And it was fun to think about my inauspicious beginnings as a teacher. We're going to get started now with the afternoon session. And this one also will have a moderator and 3 panelists. This session is going to talk about leading and supporting academic work. So what might academics want for the support, and what should those in leadership positions, and it could be a wide array of institutional or national positions, what might be good to think about as we think about supporting those who are in faculty roles during a time of change. And so we're very fortunate. I'm going to repeat, I know I said it earlier, but not everyone was with us. I'll repeat brief introductions of our afternoon speakers. And I wanted to draw your attention in the program booklet. There are fuller bios of each speaker, because we're just so grateful to these nationally very engaged colleagues for being able to be with us today. Our moderator will be Dr. Kimberly Griffin, and Kimberly is at the University of Maryland, where she is the Dean of the College of Education and a Professor of Higher Education. We also will be joined on the panel by Dr. Susan Singer, who is, her background is as a biologist, longtime faculty member, and a leader in the national context of the National Science Foundation and the National Academies, and she serves as the president of St. Olaf College. We're very delighted to have with us Dr. Mark Lee, also a biologist, who is the provost of Spelman College. And then we have our colleague, my colleague for a long time, Dr. Sandra Laursen, who is at the University of Colorado, Boulder. She's done a great deal of work in science education, and she is the director and associate, senior research associate in ethnography and evaluation research. Each of these colleagues brings a great deal of thought and experience and leadership to the work of how do we improve higher education and how do we support our colleagues who are engaged in it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly and thank everyone for participating and leading this session. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am beyond honored to moderate this afternoon's panel, Leading and Supporting Academic Work in a Changing Context. And as I started thinking about preparing what I would say for this occasion, I started thinking about this younger version of me that couldn't quite believe that this is where my life has evolved to. I cannot believe that I am part of a conversation that is honoring someone that has been so important to all of us. So I refer often to the pillars of our field as legends, and Anne has long been a legend for me. In her brilliance, she somehow balances accessibility and openness with actionable feedback and support. And she is the coach who believes in you and pushes you towards your best with a smile and with honesty. And I'm very grateful for it. So thank you, Anne, for all that you've done for me and for everybody. So as we honor Anne, I know that it is no surprise to anybody in this room that we're talking about faculty work and how we understand it. But I imagine it's also not a surprise that we're talking about how we can innovate, how can we rethink, and how can we move forward through these times towards a better collective future. So these amazing panelists are going to be leading us through this topic. I'll just say a brief word about each of them. Dr. Sandra Laursen, who across multiple projects has reflected on her strong commitment to organizational change that improves equity and faculty success, particularly for women and marginalized populations, will be offering her thoughts. Dr. Mark Lee, who as a leader and a scholar has dedicated much of his career to advancing STEM education for underrepresented groups and has led national conversations about science education reforms. And then finally, Dr. Susan Singer, who has advocated for equitable, excellent undergraduate education as a top focus throughout her career, but particularly in her leadership at St. Olaf College. And it has just been a signature element of who she is, and I cannot wait to hear what they have to say about the topic in front of us. So it is my job to be your conductor today. And so as conductor, I feel like it's important to let you know where we are going literally and where we are going figuratively. So literally, this panel will look very similar to the last. I'll speak for just a few moments. Our panelists will speak for about 17 minutes. Depending on where we land, I may or may not show some connecting themes and ask a question or two, and then we'll certainly open up to the rest of the audience for questions. But the more figurative part, before our panelists speak, is that I am to, much like Dr. Gonzalez did, orient us to this topic today, and just talk a little bit about the journey we're about to take and some of the topics that we hope to tackle. So I'll share that my interest in this topic, I was so delighted when Anne asked me to facilitate this conversation, is certainly academic and scholarly, but it's certainly also personal. And so perhaps I'll start with a personal perspective. When I introduce myself as whatever job I am in right now, I always introduce myself as a professor and a dean. That professor and scholar is always a very core part of my identity. And I really found myself early in my career in particular, always interested in the nature of the academy and the work and the roles of faculty within it. So whether I'm studying faculty directly or not, I always had lots of questions and frankly lots to say about what I observed about them, who they were, what they did, and what I thought needed to change about all of it. So like many faculty, I was very good at identifying problems, the things that were missing, the things that were wrong, the things that I thought should be different. And many of these ideas were shared this morning. So I reflected on the lack of preparation for all parts of faculty work, the lack of diversity across disciplines, but particularly in STEM, inconsistent and ill-defined hiring and promotion structures that perpetuate inequality. And then later, as I shifted more directly to thinking about like faculty and their own experiences, I wanted to talk more about a sense of overwork and burnout amongst those who are in the academy, with lots of different competing demands on their time. At research universities in particular, folks talking about having so much emphasis on grants and journal publications and their scholarly productivity over everything else. A real acknowledgement of those who were showing up and not getting rewarded for their work in the same ways as their colleagues were, particularly when we talk about service work, mentorship work, teaching work, and how often those individuals were often women and folks of color. And that, finally, despite working very hard, most faculty I know are doing the very best they can and are working very hard, that perception by students, by those outside the academy, are that faculty seem not to be showing up in the ways that students most need right now. So, these are all problems. Very good at naming problems. I would say, particularly earlier in my career, I was less good at naming solutions. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how we should name these things, but also name how change could and should happen over time. I will say over time my work also got better, and I was working towards developing more frameworks that acknowledge the importance of structures and systems in perpetuating these problems that we saw. That faculty were not individual agents making poor choices, that ultimately the academy was not set up in a way to address some of these problems. So happy to see some of my collaborators on that work in this room, so Howard and Bob, so happy to be here with Leslie Gonzalez, that we all thought about institutional models and frameworks that would allow us to name different dimensions we should look at and think about to address these challenges and support faculty in ways that could translate to better outcomes for them and for their students. But in that work, so while progress was there, in that work, there was still something missing. I would say that it was still hard to name who would lead the change and how we needed people to make folks in charge care enough to start this kind of work? And then once they cared, how do we actually make the change and how do they make things happen? I always knew that leaders and leadership, and those are two different things, I would argue, was important in this process. And I especially understand this now as someone who's actually in the work of academic leadership. I first served as Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Faculty Affairs in my college before serving as Dean. And I became intimately aware that changing faculty work, especially making changes that promote collective thriving, is often a tough and elusive goal for many reasons. One being that some of that is just the nature of academic leadership. A mentor and colleague that I respect very much said that being in faculty leadership is perhaps the hardest leadership to be in because it's really hard to get faculty to do anything they don't want to do. And that is true. I found that to be the case. But I've also found that it's challenging for other reasons. That there are sometimes few opportunities to think through how to do the work that needs to be done. People can have a deep understanding of the problem, but not sure where to begin towards solving it. These problems seem so big, and how will we make changes that will stick and that everyone isn't going to hate? And even when we have ideas and we have some willingness, how do we create strategies that will work in our changing national context that we talked about this morning, and also our unique local contexts across disciplines? Y'all see some problems here in developing these strategies. I feel so excited and honored by the opportunity to learn from the wisdom of leaders who have actually taken on this work, who have been thinking about this work. So I hope that leaders are watching this video and listening today because we have the opportunity to have a master class and lots of insights into how to do the work of actually changing faculty work. Our panel today is scholarly, smart, and wise, and they offer us insights into the work, what their work as scholars and leaders tells us about. First, their understanding of challenges associated with academic work and what needs to change. It's important to have a similar understanding of those things. How they philosophically orient themselves to this work and develop frameworks that support their and others' understanding. And then finally, how they put their good thinking to work, engaging in change efforts at the local and national levels in STEM and beyond. I am so pleased and delighted to first invite, I believe I'm going to start with Dr. Laursen today to the stage.
Thanks so much. I'm going to try to, what do I need to do in front of my notes? I'm really pleased to be here. I want to thank those who organized the Ewigleben Symposium, and now I've said it once, I've practiced for a month. But I really am excited to be here, and it's really fun to see so many colleagues. We were saying earlier, we do so much work on Zoom, it's a wonderful thing, but it's really nice to be in a room with a bunch of bodies. So, I pulled out my prognosticator hat for this. I'll talk a little bit about the past, a little bit about sort of current state of things, and a bit about the future. I work, unlike everybody else on the menu today, I work in a soft money research unit called Ethnography and Evaluation Research, and I'll say a bit about that at the end, but I just want to acknowledge that I'm not a professor or a provost or a president. I'm coming to it as somebody who works with teams all over the country who want to improve things, education and equity. All right. So Anna and I met. She's referred a couple times to how long it's been. It makes me a little bothered, but I'll say that we met because I was an internal evaluator for one of the earliest advanced projects with NSF Advanced, which was a program that lasted until last year about fixing institutional systems that were discouraging and driving women out of STEM fields. And switching the lens from, instead of trying to fix women by helping them do things or getting better at certain things, fixing the systems in which they work. The project at Colorado was called LEAP, Leadership Education for Advancement and Promotion, and Anne was our external evaluator. So we got to know each other over time, we interacted with the Colorado project, but also Anne was involved in the Michigan State project, and we were both involved as evaluators for other projects around the country. So we got interested in the questions about, people would call us up and say, what should we do? Like it was a menu item, pick one from this column and one from that column. And we thought there was a more sophisticated way to think about that. So we launched on a research project to study the practices that worked, the things that advanced projects did to improve the situation of women in STEM, and the ways they did it. So we have studied both what they did and how they did it, with support from the NSF at the time. What did we learn from that work? Well, we learned about, named and organized particular strategic interventions about gender equity on STEM faculties. And when we use the word strategic, we mean they were logical, there was a reason to do that, they had a sense, maybe a sociological or psychological theory, but maybe also a local theory of change. It was deliberate, purposeful, and it was aligned to local context. So we developed some resources that we distributed on the web. We called them the Strategic Toolkit. Anne said earlier she wasn't the acronym inventor. I think John was the acronym inventor on this one. I do that in my group, but this one was John's. And we also wrote a book about it that came out a few years ago. And so what we learned about how to do that work is captured in those resources. This is just kind of a map of the things we learned about. We documented 12 kinds of practices. We grouped them into basically two big buckets. On the left side, the blue side, is what I would call organizational strategies, things that are really changing how faculty are evaluated, how they are hired, the accountability for those processes, climate, leadership, and other things that affect everyone, right? Affect the workplace as a whole by changing institutional processes. The orange side is sort of things that are institutional changes. They're changes in policies and practices, but they're more addressing supporting individuals and the particular needs and wants and desires they have. So faculty development, support for family-friendly accommodations, mentoring and networking. So sort of two types of interventions. And I'm going to mention this again. So remember the left side. So what did we learn? We also learned, in addition to documenting the strategies, we learned that many of these strategies were robust, adaptable, and could be used in other contexts, both across fields in the university, beyond STEM, for groups besides women, particularly if one took an appropriate intersectional lens, and that these things could be used widely, right? Not exactly directly, but adapted. The approaches can be adapted. And I do want to shout out Kimberly, Griffin, and Leslie Gonzalez's work in showing that, especially through their work with the Includes project. A recent meta-synthesis by, that Anne and I both participated in, but a bunch of people who got together who had been involved in the advanced community for a long time as evaluators, has recently documented the outcomes of these things across a large set of documents and records from the projects, and that work will be coming out. There was just an op-ed kind of piece inside higher ed, but there will be more coming out. So part of the point is we now have evidence across these projects that they made a difference and had significant impacts. So the strategies are robust. Another thing we learned is just some more general strategies or approaches. And I'm not going to talk about each of these, but just to point out that thinking about these things as portfolios, not single interventions, thinking about scaffolding processes, which we were studying, sort of things that help knit these multiple programs together, multiple initiatives within a program, such as how the leadership team works, how data are used, how to recruit allies. We learned some things about the interrelationship of structural and cultural changes, some things about sustainability and institutionalization, and we do distinguish those. We also learned that there's a lot of things that push things backwards, and a lot of ways to backslide, and a lot of forms of regression. And so that project was funded by NSF. We called it Advance and Beyond. It was funded until last spring when it was cut. So again, to sort of summarize, we learned some things about what to do, we learned some things about how to do it, and we learned some things about what acts against it, barriers. And what I'll say we didn't learn, or we didn't figure out soon enough, was that some of these forces externally were pretty powerful. We thought a lot about resistance within the institution to these changes. We did not think so much about the external context changing so drastically that these programs would just disappear. And I'm guided by the work of Liz Rudy and others who have thought about, we tend to, as evaluators, we tend to think, the status quo is going to keep going and our program's going to make it better, right? Or maybe the status quo will even be getting better, but we're going to get there faster. We don't tend to think about situations where the status quo is declining or taking a nosedive. And so sometimes, so that's an error, I think, that we the community made in thinking about these things. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about then, how do we do this kind of work now, right? Sometimes when I pull that yellow book that Ann and I wrote together off the shelf, it makes me a little sad because some of the things that we wrote about aren't being done right now and aren't possible to do right now. But I think that means we shouldn't give up. So I've thought a bit about this and talked to some wise colleagues. So I want to offer you 3 options for continuing to do equity-directed systems change work. And one is just to go underground for a little while, right? Husband your resources. A friend of mine is a psychologist, Glenda Russell, who talks about, when institutional strategies don't seem very available, use personal and interpersonal ones, right? Record your ideas, write a memoir, make art, talk to people, learn. Also converse with others, right? Write thank you notes, save keepsakes. Write the history and do things in community. Because that is partly how you avoid psychic erasure, right? It's really important to, when other forces in the country are trying to make you invisible, to resist that. So this is a thing she talks about in a wonderful blog called Tools for Troubled Times. Research-based advice from a psychologist about how to do this. She's particularly interested in queer history, so she's thinking a lot about that group of folks, but I think it applies to the rest of us too. The other thing we can do is maybe a step building on that, which is to prepare for the future. Document those things, record them, think ahead, but also analyze what can we do better when the time comes. And that doesn't need to be that we don't know when that time might come, but there will be chances again, right? History goes up and down. So protect the knowledge, but identify the flaws, right? Don't just think about it nostalgic, we're going to build back to the way it was. Think about what we can do better. And be sure to hand that knowledge and insight off to the next set of leaders. A project I really like that is doing this is called Next Interior. It's folks from the Department of the Interior, right? People who work in the Forest Service, BLM, and so on, who are capturing knowledge, doing oral histories and document analyses and other things to say what did we do well, but also what could be better. When we have the chance, what will we build? And they're going to be ready, right? They're building the next interior now. It's a lovely project. A third art thing I want to mention is we can make new arguments for the same kinds of work. This one's a little trickier, but I think we can still use data, we can still disaggregate data, and we can still identify barriers to students and faculty participation, to equity. What we need to do is then also find, we can design authentically neutral initiatives, that's lawyer language, authentically neutral, not mine, to address those barriers. But we identify them so we can still find out what the barriers are, and then we think as a system, right, about the system, where are those, what can we do to fix those things? And so what I want to argue is that we actually need to lean in right now to the left side of my diagram, the organizational strategies. And I say that in opposition to what I often have heard in the last year, which is people talking, for instance, about inclusive teaching, and they're saying, well, you can still do it. Kimberly, you can still be the hero in your own classroom. And I think that, puts an extra burden on the teacher, but it also sort of suggests that's the only option. And I think we can still think about systems solutions to the problems that students experience or the problem our faculty colleagues experience without having to name it as an inclusion issue, right? So we're fudging the language. The moral reasons are still there, but we're using different language. A couple of projects I like that I think are doing this right now. I'm not going to talk about them in detail, but one is the Delta Project at the University of Georgia, which is using evaluation of teaching as a way to improve teaching and learning, like Dia talked about this morning. And they have had to do that in a state that has been sort of putting restrictions on for a while. And so they have come around to ways of talking about this. They're very committed to inclusive teaching, but they talk about it in terms of comparing apples to apples, right? If you teach a big class, your teaching evaluations should be able to be fairly compared with those who teach a small class, right? And we know that's one of the biases that students have. So you can talk about it in ways that appeal to fairness, that's a common value. You can talk about it in ways that appeal to faculty workload issues. We want to have evidence about our teaching that is useful, that helps us improve, right? And they have a very collaborative design that enables faculty to do some work together, that makes things better. And it's at a time, they've noticed that, at a time when the science faculty are feeling kind of battered by funding cuts and other things, this is work they can do that does reward their work. The advanced project at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh is one that got their award at a time when the state was really reorganizing higher education, campuses were being combined, layoffs were happening, everything was disruptive, people were very cranky. And so they had to figure out how to talk about equity and gender equity with their advanced work at a time when the institution was in a tizzy about these other things. And what they did was they took the data, both data about women's retention and about climate, and they said, look, we're hemorrhaging women from this institution. That is costing us a lot of money, right? And so they turned that argument about what could have been an equity argument or a morally based argument into an argument about the institution's finances. Super smart, right? Because it goes to something that is happening. And then they also trained up a whole bunch of faculty to go out and talk about that. Whatever meetings, whatever committees, wherever they were, they could talk about that financial responsibility. And so I think that's another great example of working the equity imperative into another kind of institutional imperative. All right, one of the things they also did at Oshkosh was they hired Lucas Hill and his colleagues to come in and help them do this planning. And so they really call out, I heard them give a talk recently, they call out Lucas very strongly. And I want to mention that Lucas and my group at Colorado and a whole bunch of other groups I could name and a bunch of others I haven't named here are partners in the kinds of reforms we're talking about. We're all at risk. We're research faculty. Funding levels have been cut drastically. My unit, for instance, lost $2.5 million last spring within about 3 weeks. 4 out of 5 funded PIs lost a grant. Everybody's down to part-time. And we've laid off other people. So I want to say that although these organizations have arisen at a time when we were talking about broader impacts, we were talking about the importance of gathering evaluation and research data on STEM initiatives, we grew up in a time when we have been partners in those reforms that we've talked about today. And we are at risk of sinking. And so I want to just put that in your mind as one more kind of faculty that is suffering some losses right now. And also say to those of you who might have projects, think of us. I can give you a bunch of recommendations for excellent people, and I'd be happy to do that because I think we may not appreciate the roles that these groups play in evaluation, research, supporting web-based resources, convenings, professional development, all kinds of things, outreach. So all of these units have different specialties, but we're all in that ecosystem of supporting STEM reform projects that it's a business model that's worked for Ian Yar for 40 years, but won't keep working. So I just want to mention that as another kind of faculty to think about. All right, so I'll go back to my magic ball, crystal ball. There are some challenges ahead that we can take on. One is to plan our change initiatives for possibly difficult futures, as well as the rosy ones. And again, Liz Rudy's work is one that I think will commend to you with some tools to do that. Another thing is to really think now about how to measure and value the contributions of all faculty, not just tenure-eligible faculty. That's come up today already. I'll show you this grant of funding issued by NSF to date as of last week or so. And that red line at the bottom is where we are for 2026 compared to previous years. And so in this context, this is a time to say, well, some of the traditional metrics for everybody might not be valuable right now, right? if you're a person trying to get tenure and you can't get a grant, it's not going to be your fault necessarily. So this is a good time to look at the metrics we use to value faculty contributions. It's a bad reason, you have to look at them, but it's a good time to do that. There's an opportunity here. We can use data, as I mentioned, to identify and remove barriers, improve working conditions for all, right? We can still use the data. We're just going to make different arguments. And translate those equity imperatives into operational imperatives for institutions. When the pressures are on, this is a good time to do that. And finally, we do still need to tend to our own psyches and that of our people. I originally had the word protect our people, and I thought, no, I can't protect anybody, but I can defend them, I can't stick up for them. And so I think that's an important thing to do. At this time, right, there's a lot of reasons to look at the glass as half empty. There are some reasons to look at it as half full. And there are some reasons to say, let's look at the glass a different way. Let's put our artist hat on instead of our optimist or our pessimist hat on. And this is a quote I like that I heard recently in a talk. Be a firefighter now and an architect of systemic change for a better future for everyone. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. Good afternoon. I was planning, according to the program, to file a complaint of following Susan Singer. Sandra didn't help any, so I will still be putting that into the evaluation. Thank you again. It's great to be here. I feel like I'm coming home of sorts to Michigan State because I spent some time here in the Dean's Office of the Graduate School working with Rick and Melissa, Pero, and others. Thomas Yashko was a dean at the time. I don't see him in the room. Thomas, are you here?
He's out of town.
I was out of town. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to say that, and again, great to be here in honor of the work of Ann Austin. I was asked to talk about what it's like in my kind of position as a provost in doing this kind of work, and I want to share some of my thoughts with you at this time. First, the foundation that really guides me is what I'm calling the Spelman promise. And I say that because I found myself using this term and I didn't quite have a meaning for it, and one of my team members said, what do you mean when you say that? I said, you know, I don't quite know, because I think it probably changes depending on the context of the conversation. But I've been serving as provost since July 2025. And I was asked to serve in this role after my predecessor stepped away, you know, at the last minute. And I was very, very resistant to the thought. So I said, well, Mark, how will you guide your decision making? And I said, well, first, if the proposal is brought to me, I want to know whether or not it's consistent with our mission. That seems to be one of the easiest things to do. Second, because our mission doesn't change very much, and every once in a while we decide to embark on a strategic plan, the next question was, is this in the language of our strategic plan? And then lastly, my question is, does it serve students? And so using those three frames, for me, is easy to arrive at least half of what I'm describing as a so-called Spelman promise. The other parts of it will be revealed a little later. My question to you first, and this is for you to think about, how is your institutional mission? Does it reflect at all in how you decide to do the work you do, or is it simply something that's on a website or a pamphlet? And the floor is open.
No.
All right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Noah. Is that the consensus from the room? In other words, yes, ma'am.
At the school level, yes.
Thank you. Can you elaborate just a bit for us,
The
please?
mission, vision, and values are spelled out in a way that captures what we care about.
Beautiful. Thank
And in the
you.
language we need to use now.
Perfect. So what I tried to do is use my framing of the so-called Spelman promise as a bit of a North Star to kind of guide the work. First, there should be professional development for faculty that's aligned with our mission. In other words, if we expect our faculty to deliver the mission, The question is, how well are they prepared to do so? And if they aren't prepared to do so, what can we do to enhance that? And then when they embark on the work and they drive and they move the mission forward, what are the recognition mechanisms to acknowledge that work? Or are we expecting them to do it without recognition? And then lastly, how can our scholarly work and our pedagogical approaches be synergized? For some reason, we have this divide between even our institutional identities. I'm a research institution. Show me one that doesn't embark on teaching. I'm a teaching institution. Show me one that doesn't actually celebrate some level of scholarship. This divide we've created, I think this doesn't serve us and doesn't serve the learners we want to support. So our faculty work has been broken up into some pieces, and those pieces are for us what we call the 4 centers of excellence. The first of them is advancing STEM, and to my scientists in the room, we're always trying to do that because we think that problem solving is probably rooted in some level of science. Second, we want to enhance career pathways for students. While I agree, I did not take this role as an academician, thinking about preparing students for jobs, it is definitely part of the value proposition of higher education today. Next, we need to figure out what it means for us to be AI proficient. As individuals, as institutions, and especially in our classrooms, some of these things, again, we can't avoid the tidal wave that is coming. Hopefully we can learn how to serve. And then lastly, the Spelman voice. What can we do to elevate the unique proposition that Spelman brings to the landscape of higher education, and then how can we enhance that? Next, we went on this, before I go forward, I'm sorry. My question to you now is, please consider how your existing recognition frameworks support faculty work at your institutions. Okay, so the question, does it? And if it does, how? So first question, does it? Noah? It does? Yeah. All right, awesome. Can you tell us how?
Yeah.
Please embark on a short...
Well, in brief, taking scholarly frameworks, externalizing what our goals and vision are, operationalizing those through a framework, identifying those as a framework, operationalizing those as a rubric, and then going through the professional development and in community-based work for us to enact that.
Awesome. I ditto that. So next, I was greeted in my role in the office by what I saw as a dearth of evaluations. In other words, I didn't see a lot of programs and departments that were giving me the kind of feedback on what they've done that was so magical in the last year. Some of those individuals were asking me for increases in their stipends. So I was looking for metrics to justify these criteria. So I realized, okay, I need to figure out a way to operationalize and incentivize these kinds of reporting. Came up with the idea of inviting faculty to VisionCast. And this whole idea was what we're calling vision projects. Instead of having them write me a proposal, write me a final report. Tell the future. Tell me how the world or Spelman would be different in 12 months. And tell me how the students that are supported by this work will be different, not in allusion to students broadly, but the 4 or 5 students that you're actually going to guide in this work. So I got 6 takers to take on a small investment. And that work started last semester. It is ongoing. The beautiful thing about that is I use those final reports to craft a template for a reporting that I can now share with everyone. So I decided to crowdsource. Why have me in my small brain, or a unique one, or a single brain, articulate to a group what they should do and how they should communicate? How about I let them tell me in at least 6 varieties, and I propose a framework that can capture the ways that can be done across the academy. My question to you then, if your provost or academic leader asks you to embark on a vision, very, very risky, innovative idea, what exactly would you do? Someone else besides Noah. These aren't rhetorical questions. If you were allowed to do anything you wanted and you had the budget to do it, what would that look like? can't imagine that.
I would do a 4-day work week.
Say it again?
I would do a 4-day work week, so we could all have a mental health day or a creative day or something like that.
Okay,
How about a
awesome.
6-day work week?
Because too many of us are working for 7 days. Thank you. The 4-day work week, honestly, I think one of the gifts, if there's such a thing, that COVID gave us was the idea that, you know, work did not necessarily have a place or a time frame. You know, the work can be moved and you could be in several places while hopefully doing that work. The next thing I had before me was convincing the faculty that my appointment in this role wasn't a terrible idea. And the first event of the year is our so-called Faculty Institute. Typically, we have a morning session of brain-dead conversation. We have a lunch, and we have an afternoon session that tries to survive the impact of the lunch. I looked at the budget, and I said, really, is that all the money we have and I'm supposed to use it all on food? So I decided to cut the day in half, invited everyone to come after lunch. So that way breakfast and lunch was on their own. We're only going to have the session for a few hours in the afternoon. Shock and awe. The budget, though, was used to fund what we called Faculty Excellence Awards. We identified, well, we encouraged chairs to identify members in their department who were multi-year faculty driving the pedagogical mission, to identify tenure track faculty along the ideas of teaching effectiveness, research mentoring, and because we had as part of our QEP, our global engagement. So in those 4 categories, we identified 60 individuals out of 200 faculty. And we gave each of them an opportunity to respond to this nomination. So yes, there was an intention that department leaders were recognizing the sunshine in their department. I think you did an amazing job of X, Y, and Z last year. I'm nominating you for this award. So we told them they were nominated, and we asked them to provide the narrative that supported the nomination. Again, not making the chair write the nominating document. So they responded. We gave them certificates and checks that went with those awards, and I told them this was either pasta primavera or exactly what you're getting now. My question to you is, if you were recognized by your academic leadership and were rewarded, what kind of response would that give you as a professional and as a person? Your silence makes me remember the classroom.
We're getting a check with it, right?
Say it again?
Are we getting a check with it?
Absolutely.
Then I'm happy.
All right, I'll take that. And then, lastly, I told them, because I started in July, I said next year's awards, because I promised that I would take whatever I did back to the president and say, you have to fund this for next year. I'm gonna look like an idiot. Next year's awards won't have to operate by that same mechanism. Next year's awards are going to be informed by your annual evaluation. So if you want to be recognized, simply return your annual evaluation and put in the details that you think support your nomination. So now all of a sudden evaluations go from what I experienced, they go into a 3-ring binder, onto a shelf, never to be seen again. Now, all of a sudden, what felt like busy work informs a recognition cycle that we would like to embark on. My question to you, are your annual reports a box to check or something that drives how you guide your work? I'll take that as a response. I want to say in closing that I learned a lot from working with individuals in this room, and definitely from Ann Austin herself. And one of the things I learned, the most effective way to support a changing faculty is to align their professional and development and recognition with their institutional mission. I can say that because Ann and I and others wrote an article describing exactly this. I didn't know 2 years later I would be asked to serve this role, but taking on that role, I had a framework to operate by. And I had some language and some thinking to guide it, and I have that work to thank for it. So I would like to say, Ann, in recognition of your work, I want to say your example of leadership has served as a steady compass for me. Long before I was even thinking about these kinds of roles, your insight into changing nature of faculty work taught me that our brightest and calling was to nurture the scholars within our communities. On a personal level, you gave me an example and you gave me language to help articulate my approach. I think I'm a better leader because I was supported by examples like yours. Congratulations to you for amassing this level of convening power.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Sorry, I'm getting over bronchitis, so I apologize for any marking. And congratulations on your upcoming retirement. You have my deepest gratitude for all you've done to support faculty work over the arc of a truly remarkable career, as evidenced by this web of connected folks in this room. Personally, you mean the world to me as a cherished friend, a colleague, a research collaborator, all of which are amongst the high points of my career. And remember, Anne, we have a book to finish. Kimberly, thank you for kicking off this session. And one of the things that resonated with me was solution finding. So I just wanted to share with everyone that the title of our strategic plan at St. Olaf is Solution Seekers. So we're starting really early to make sure that everyone is on a trajectory to really identify what is the key problem, right? What are we trying to solve, which has been a gift in the conversations today, but also what are the solutions? So the opportunity to speak today has created space for me for reflection on the changing context of academic work. 40 years ago, I embarked on my own faculty career filled with excitement and the persistent fear that others would soon find out that I had no idea at the very mature age of 24 that I had a clue to what I was doing. I had taught secondary school, I was certified to teach, but these were college kids. And what did I have to stand up in front of them? With that, I want to note, you've heard this multiple times today. Did you notice it was all women? Thank you, Anne and Sandra, for all the work you've done over the years with Advance and for making it asset-based. When I was at NSF the first time, the bio directorate, 99 to 2001, we launched the predecessor of Advance. They were the Power Grants. They were deeply demeaning. And then Advance started in 2001 as I was finishing up. It wasn't just the grants, the work of folks like Anne and Sandra that helped us focus on the positive ways we can all support each other. We can support everyone. Okay, so along the way, I found joy in leading a learning and teaching center, leading and funding change at the National Science Foundation, and trying to motivate people with evidence as we built and grew the Board on Science Education at the National Academies. Today, I'm privileged to lead St. Olaf through a period of profound change. And each step along the way, like many of you have articulated, we've recognized there's a huge system embedded within multiple systems. So how can we pull, as Anne would say, the right levers within our sphere of influence? So the broader context, the sea we're all swimming in, as Emily Miller pointed out, is really complicated. We're shifting a 75-year-old social contract that emerged after the Second World War between higher education and the federal government that has fostered global competitiveness and innovation for 3/4 of a century. Over that time, the independence of higher education and academic freedom flourished. Curiosity-driven research created an inspiring environment for faculty work, and it drove national prosperity. I had a front row seat to this shift in Florida, where I served as a provost for 7 years. Questions about who leads an institution and what is taught shifted towards the state executive and legislative branches. The independence of institutions and academic freedom became hotly debated. The decline in the perception of higher education as a public good continues to drive growing mistrust of colleges and universities. And the demographic cliff, which is as much a demographic shift in race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, is adding new challenges to colleges and universities and presenting us with a change in who shows up in our classrooms. Are we ready? I think we heard a bit about that earlier today. Ironically, this is at a time when the embrace of evidence-based teaching practices, attention to students' holistic education and holistic being, a focus on open source publishing, and changes to tenure and promotion policies are gaining momentum. Collectively, all these shifts are accelerating change in faculty work. So I chose 3 key changes and the implications to work through with all of you. The first is autonomy, the second is community, and the third is the reward system. So I'll break it up into those chunks, identifying the challenges and also offering some opportunities ahead. So from my perspective as a scientist, one of the joys of academic life is sating my curiosity by finding answers to truly unknown questions. Discovery is deeply satisfying. That joy is rooted in the academic freedom where we choose the questions, predicated, of course, on our capacity to convince others, including funders and publishers, of the quality of the work. The shift in the availability of funding and guardrails on what is fundable add stress, affect motivation, and zap joy from the work. That's really tough on faculty at all points in their career. Curricular flexibility is another source of joy. Shared governance has long given faculty domain over courses and the overall curriculum, acknowledging their deep disciplinary expertise. Wings are clipped when, for example, non-academics determine that sociology cannot be included in general education in the Florida publics. At the federal level, Cornell University negotiated and paid a hefty fee to have its funding reinstated. Wow, and this is really important, I think. They were able to maintain academic freedom and institutional autonomy to hire and to tenure. Governing boards embark on steep learning curves as they work to support their institutions with growing external voices filtering that are cluttering sometimes their thinking, focusing their attention. That's a tough space to navigate right now. Faculty ponder if they need to change their research direction or teach different courses. They fret over preparing the next generation of researchers when they can't get into graduate school, for example, or have their graduate offers rescinded at the last moment because of funding shortages. They contemplate changing expectations in career readiness for their undergraduates. They feel the weight of growing attention to retention for revenue flow and what that means for how they teach, at the same time when the resources that support their own professional development are shrinking. So where are there opportunities in this? It's not exactly an uplifting state of affairs. Well, I think now is a critically important time to bring all stakeholders together. So the board, the faculty, the administration, to review and to recommit to shared governance. And everybody plays a role in this. It's not something we can just take for granted as a faculty, and it's not an impediment to being nimble as some board members might imagine. But unless we work together, we're not going to get there. It's, as you heard from Mark, a time to center mission. Land grant institutions like MSU have such a clear sense of purpose. And it's at a time when that's a great way to illustrate the public good of higher education. At St. Olaf, our commitment to global liberal learning is infused with our history as an institute of Lutheran higher education. So we also have a very clear North Star. Not all institutions have the gifts that MSU and St. Olaf have, but if you look a little bit more deeply, it's there. So again, I won't say a lot, because Mark, you did a beautiful job with this, but knowing who you are, aligning what you do with your mission, your values, and your strategic plan. So with my team, we've built a strategic resource allocation plan, right? You can't have budgets happening over here, strategy happening here, and not link them together. If something's a priority, then you need to put your resources there. Nobody has enough resources. Well, maybe somebody out there does, and I will cheer you on. We certainly don't. We're a healthy but not a wealthy college. So we have to be a bit like Marie Kondo, and with deepest gratitude, say farewell to things that have served us well, to create space for more things. None of us are good at this, including those who are thinking about retirement and have to think about what to do with all their cherished belongings. So just really making that a priority is the way forward. Let me shift a little though to community. And I'll start with a question. Where do faculty find community? It's important because a strong collaborative department is key to supporting students and to welcoming and supporting new faculty. Shifts towards increasing numbers of contingent faculty mean colleagues are often searching for their next position rather than investing in their current department. That's a really wise thing to do if you have a very limited contract. But that changes the culture. And what I've seen over time is loyalty shifts to your subfield within a discipline, and often to colleagues you collaborate with at other institutions, instead of centering your department as home. That's not good or bad, it's just the way the world has worked, and we need to be aware of that. And post-COVID, the pull to work at home, where, depending on the age of your children, it can actually be a little quiet, is tempting and appropriate if you're working on a deadline. But that also shifts advising and other responsibilities disproportionately to whoever happens to be in the office at a given time. So social connections matter, but they take intentionality, they take planning, And I would posit it is really worth the effort to think about what makes sense at this moment in time. We need to build our departmental culture. I think there's great tools out there, institution-wide, college-wide, departmental-wide. You can use the coach survey to really begin to go in and diagnose what's happening at the faculty level in terms of how your faculty are experiencing things. This is a little bit of a shout out to our honoree who actually did all the work maybe 30 years ago that developed Coach, which is now housed at Harvard and updated to keep up with the times. I don't know what Anna's gonna do with the boxes in her basement documenting 400 institutions that participated in the first kinds of surveys. But you can find out really interesting things. I've done the coach at my prior institution and at my current institution. And, you know, I joked a little about gender in the beginning, but one of the things that showed up at both institutions I've been at and the larger data speaks to the work that Advance, I hope, will continue to inform. Women report spending more time on teaching than men. They report spending more time on advising. Those are great things for the students. Men report more time, and this is not everybody. To the gentleman in the room, I'm not pulling you into this, and women, some of you may have a different balance, but they report spending a lot more time on their research. It's worth a conversation, right? The world has not shifted all that much. I want to be clear, I am not making the case for the nostalgia of faculty wives. As the first woman in my department, and there just didn't happen to be others in the sciences when I started, yeah, I got to be both the faculty wife for myself. My husband worked in industry and often worked in Thailand and Malaysia, and the faculty member. That's a lot of work. I don't know that we can go back to the actual way we approach things, but what were the elements out of that that really mattered with the connections with our students? Are there other ways we can creatively accomplish some of that? So let me move on now to the reward system, which presents a lot of opportunities. We don't necessarily have good alignment between what we're rewarding our faculty for and what collectively our institutions and our students need. And we really could benefit from some alignment. So things like funding streams changing, right? If we set the bar up here for dollars in research, or your lab square footage may shrink, well, what are you gonna do with all that empty lab space? And there's also, the federal government has led this. I think it's a great idea to have more publishing in open journals. But gosh, you know, I realized when two of my faculty published in Nature this month, they came asking for the $12,000 that they need because it was federally funded to cover the open publication. That I'm still awfully proud of my Nature and Science papers, and I'm probably part of the problem, right? And how do we begin to change tenure and promotion? How do we change department culture so we have a range of reasons we value publishing in different places? And Dia spoke to the work she's done with Noah and Anne earlier today, that wonderful book that came out of the TVAL project. How do we change the way we measure? Oh, we hadn't maybe actually measured teaching, but we took the end of the term evaluations. What are more holistic ways to do that? And then we've heard today about where are the spaces where we begin to blend teaching, research, and service. So how do we create space and validate the engaged community research that our Gen Z faculty colleagues hunger for, our communities hunger for, and could also help make visible the value, the public good of what we're offering as institutions of higher education? What about discipline-based and social research? I mentioned a few books. I've been at Cornell recently, and almost every science department, engineering departments, economics has a discipline-based education researcher who's valued as a full and participatory member of the team. That's a big shift in a decade. And what indicators are we using? Again, I want to come back to the teaching piece just for a second again to T-Val, thinking about indicators, right? We heard again, Mark, thank you for bringing up the importance of metrics and indicators. How do we know if we're really succeeding? I think that's important for us to look at. And how do we get to a shared understanding of what effective teaching is? I literally, maybe this happened to some of you, I can remember early on faculty colleagues observing my teaching saying, oh, let me know when you're going to teach and I'll come back then, because I've always done really interactive things with students. I hope that doesn't happen as much anymore, but maybe we could have a conversation. And I also think we've lost sight of one of the highest purposes of higher education, which is civic preparation to participate in democracy, with a little d. 100 years ago, John Dewey took up the cause for this. He was arguing for more relevant education, so he was probably thinking about the equivalent of Gen Zs, but he was also arguing about preparing people for democracy, right? He said democracy needs to be born again each generation, and education is the midwife. It's really worth taking seriously. And are we empowering our students to be good critical thinkers, to get out and learn by engaging in the community? And there, I would also say that it's going to take everybody. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to harp a little on good governance. Because good governance requires active faculty participation. And that's actually part of service, right? I don't know, we're making progress on weighting teaching, but what are we doing with even including service in tenure and promotion decisions? So now we really need faculty in shared governance. Shared governance isn't just let's protect ourselves that have tenure from all the bad things in the world. It's a chance to, together with the administration, especially the board, to solve some of the pressing problems of higher education, to reinvent ourselves. That takes time. What are we going to let go of, or how are we going to support our faculty to contribute to envisioning the future of the education? So, yes, faculty work is quite different than it was 50 years ago. I think for higher ed to thrive, collaboration and participation across campus are essential. And as our faculty feel increasingly pulled in so many directions, and I probably just added to that problem statement, how at an institutional level can we commit to what is the core work? What are the priorities? And yes, you have autonomy, you can do other things, but this is what we expect of you. How do we then let go of what served us well in the past and let go of it with grace and gratitude? And are we using our strategic plan to drive resources and to drive time decisions. So I think it's through a genuine and thoughtful shared governance and inclusion of everyone at the college. That includes our staff, and thank you for raising that early on, and faculty with all different types of contracts, and the student voice, because we're designing things for our students, not for us when we were students, right? That's never going to work. I really, really believe that higher education can really earn its place as one of the most respected institutions in this country. So, thank you.
Well, let's give our panel one more round of applause. Yep. Thank you, everybody. I have pages and pages of notes, and so much that I could potentially ask. I want to open questions to the audience, certainly, if I could ask one question, and then that hopefully will allow folks a moment to think before you bring your questions forward. So I appreciated so much the consistency in the themes that you shared, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that you all spoke to like specific things to change, like structural changes and policies and how they need to be integrated and how they need to be strategic. And I think so often in higher ed we think about those structural change pieces, but you also spoke about cultural change and how we come to shared understandings about what's important in an institution and where we're going and how we get there together. Could you reflect a little bit more on that integration of cultural and structural change and how you bring folks along on the journey, particularly middle managers like me?
I'll just say that getting people together, the key infrastructure thing you can do is to create some time during at least a few days a week when no one is teaching, and maybe you even forbid committees from meeting. Faculty meetings used to be at night. I used to panic about what I did with 3 little kids. How can we create space in the day, but then have compelling opportunities so people don't go take a nap or do yoga?
Thank you for the question. I now recall I didn't give you the second part of the Spelman Promise. If you don't mind, I'd like to do that.
Oh, go right ahead.
Which is balancing our institutional history. Spelman was founded in 1881, and almost every innovation is challenged by, we've never done it that way. And so what I'm encouraging them to do, and this is part of the cultural question, is to embrace our history, but be courageous enough to innovate. And that balance, to me, along with those other 3 questions, is kind of that promise piece. So I'll say for me, I've read, none of us, or few of us, have been prepared for leading others. We got our degrees and we did our training or whatever, and then we were good at that, and someone said, we're gonna put you in another office. And immediately I realized personally that I had no real power, right? I only had, potentially, their willingness to cooperate. And so the real goal was to find tones and language and or agenda that they already agree with, and then to steer that into the direction that I think I would like to go or the institution wants to go. And I got that from business literature, individuals like Jim Collins, Good to Great, the Chip and Dan Heath, and the kinds of books they write about change and switching and things like that. None of that was in the academy. All of it was in the business world, and I know we hate business until we need money. But corporations are moving, and their motivations are profits. Our motivations should be people, but it shouldn't necessarily be different.
I think one of the things we've learned, I think, from watching advanced projects is that structures can lead to culture, and my rule of thumb I've developed after watching a few of these things is that it's a structural change when the first department head does the new thing, or the first committee chair does the new thing. If it continues when the personnel change, then it becomes a cultural change, right? It's now embedded. And Another example I'd like to think about is an institution for which I was an evaluator where they worked hard on incorporating education for search committees on implicit bias and the ways that affects faculty hiring. And those people who had been through that professional development and served on search committees and saw it be successful started to figure out that you could use that idea other places. You could use that idea when you admitted graduate students. You could use that idea when you wrote letters for graduate students. And suddenly that became a thing that everybody knew about and talked about and spread to other committees and other workspaces and other spheres. And I think that's another example of where the structural effort led the culture. The other thing I'll say about that is the culture, as perceived by senior faculty who'd been there a long time, it had changed a lot. They would tell me stories about how, you know, oh, people don't say this kind of thing anymore. This never happened before and now it does, or this thing that used to happen doesn't happen anymore. Susan and I had an experience where a department chair observed me and said, I'll come back when you're teaching. And I started the group work, right? So, you know, when they tell you stories like that, it's real. It's a good indicator of cultural change. But the early career faculty were like, this place is so backward, right? And both were true, both were true. So culture is local, culture is how you perceive your experience. And for the early career faculty, they didn't know about how bad it used to be. They could still see ways it was bad. So I think culture is a hard thing, but you can pull it along. And it takes a lot of people doing it, and it takes perpetuation. I think that's my main marker, right? The perpetuation of it.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, questions? There's one.
I'm listening to you all and I'm very inspired about actions I can take and things I can do to move this forward. I'm very committed to academic governance, and I'm working in the gender affirming care and the addiction medicine space, so it's been very, very, very challenging, right? But the one thing I'm struggling with is I see all these ways forward, but I'm burned out. And when I tell people that, I get one of two responses. The first response is, how can I help you? I want to help you. And the second response is like, this is what we do. We have a 7-day work week, and the grind and getting to burnout is glorified. And I have spent resources connecting within my community, so I've figured it out. But what I've found is that there are few institutional resources for faculty who are feeling the way I am feeling. And in addition, at Michigan State, you know, we have our fixed term faculty, of which I am a proud member. And, you know, for our tenure stream colleagues, they get sabbatical, which doesn't quite, you know, answer the problem. But there's no systemic support for burnout when it happens, I think, at least none that I'm aware of. I'm just curious about how we address burnout while still making progress, and what sort of systemic changes or supports might we think about to make that happen?
So, again, I think part of the challenge is the way that we assign work removes any opportunity for a break, intellectually or psychologically. When I was chairing my department, I decided to try to orchestrate our workload with one semester that was key focused on the introductory portion of our curriculum. And the second semester, or the opposing semester, focused on that individual's either electives or scholarly work. What does that look like? They will take on a heavy workload, let's say in the fall, but in the spring they'll teach a section or two of their elective course, which they could probably do just from memory. In addition to that, they also teach a course that is a course-based undergraduate research course. So they bring in students, and these students are now getting course credit, they're getting research experience, and this is a course, so it can be supported now by instructional supplies. All of a sudden, you put that semester in conjunction with a summer, and that person has 8 months of dedicated time and effort towards their work. With that, we were able to have, and thank you, Rick, for allowing me to give that talk at CERTL, but with that kind of approach, we had a department that was half male, half female, half international, half domestic. Everyone got funded, NSF heavily. Everyone got tenure, and it was a cultural thing. And to your point, Sandra, I stepped down in 2016, and I thought it's going to all just come apart. I'm not in the department anymore, and it's still moving in that same direction.
I would encourage everyone to look at the Chronicle in Higher Education today. There's an article that speaks to this, and it talks about staff and faculty. And I think it's rough being a faculty member right now. And with all the budget cuts, right, a lot of jobs have been eliminated without eliminating the work. So now staff are doing two things, and I think we might need to own as faculty that in our desire to catch our breath or, you know, tuck someone in for at night or make a meal, we let our staff take on more. So I think it's a joint effort between faculty and staff. We have in our strategic plan a whole section on community well-being, which includes working to let go of things or design, you know, what is nice but not essential. But that article may be, you know, some articulate evidence to share with people and get a conversation going. Did you want to add?
If I could add one small thing, I think as a leader, in addition to creating these spaces for breaks, the question I often ask myself is like, when am I incentivizing y'all to do that? Yeah. Right? Like, when did I give someone an A+ or a gold star for working themselves to burnout? And how can I start undoing that a little bit? And being more vocal and transparent about my own efforts to not be burned out, I think gives other folks permission, right? Like if I am willing to say that yoga mat in the corner of my office gets rolled out, right? Or that like, I'm not gonna answer you on the weekend. Like I think it feels like permission from folks in the chairs that we get to sit in to say, this is what I'm not going to do, and I don't expect it from you either. Even though I think that burnout is a systemic issue, not an individual issue. It's not yours to fix. But there are things that we can do to model that what we reward you for is not necessary.
I was just going to dovetail. Hi, Noah. Thank you. Let me upvote what Kim just said here, and I want to amplify that. Burnout is a symptom. Overwork is the root cause.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is where I want to give Anne another shout out. She focuses on systems in which people are embedded. So let's, you know, yes, we want ourselves to be advocates as individuals and engage and develop coping strategies, but let's fix the system in which we are embedded, and we are the change agents to go about doing that. So let's double down on structures, as Mark just alluded to, that he's engaged in, and Kim, you were just giving a shout out, because I really want to underscore that point. I'm happy to forego my question if there was another question.
If we could maybe have one last question, and then I think we have to transition. Okay, so my question is about how we should think through the changes that are happening inside of many colleges and universities now that are going to shift the values, not just of governance, but of the faculty. And what that's going to mean for the kind of work that you're talking about and kind of getting better at doing better. So Harvard has these $10 million endowed chairs for viewpoint diversity, so they're going to be hiring in very powerful, well-placed, influential people who hold probably reactionary worldviews. This is happening at many, many universities, both public and private. If you think about a dozen states are now opening civics centers and centers for American thought. And they're going to be bringing in faculty members who are going to have tenure, who are going to hold completely different values from the ones that you've articulated. And those people will be with us even if government changes in a decade. This is going to be part of the academy now, moving forward. So how do we think about that in relationship to what you've been talking about today?
You may not like my answer. I believe in academic freedom, and if we're talking about academic freedom or free speech, there's too much of this free speech for me but not for thee. And I don't know that the mechanisms you suggested are going to get us there, but I think we really need to look hard at whether we're a welcoming place for people that think a little differently. Oops. Think a little differently. It may have just run out of batteries. Okay. All right, so it may think a little differently than us. And if you look at hiring practices, most faculty shift quite a ways from center. So I think my response would be, let's think more about how we invite people in to the conversations. We have something called the Institute for Freedom and Community. It was established but with a very generous gift a decade ago by someone who leans very far to the right. It did not get off to an auspicious start. I've had a colleague for the past 3 years that has worked so hard to try approaches of really constructive dialogue. We now have community values of curiosity, courage, inclusion, and grace in entering any conversation. And the Minneapolis Star Tribune featured an article around election time with a couple of our students that leaned right, talking about their experience. And, whether you agree with them or not, I am so glad they felt they could speak up and be heard. So I said, you might not like my answer, but it's got to cut both ways.
I like your answer.
I appreciate your concern about the leverage that money and status may give those voices. And I would say, bring on the peer review. If the ideas are sound, they will last, and if they aren't, they won't. And I say that coming from an institution that, had John Eastman as one of our first conservative scholars, and he just got disbarred yesterday. So his activities caught up with him, right? And I think that's fair.
And I just want to come back to an idea that was shared over and over again here, and it doesn't fix everything, but I think North Stars help so much. Like if across campus we have a shared understanding, a shared commitment, and a shared sense of what are we all here to do, I really appreciated those 4 kind of pillars of how we engage in dialogue with each other. If we can agree to those things, then I think we can handle a lot. We can tolerate a lot. So with that, I think we're in a moment of transition. I want to thank these panelists for their wonderful, amazing insights.